Welcome to Security Boulevard, the cybersecurity podcast from the Futurum Group. Our episodes explore a variety of topics within cybersecurity and the technologies that drive it. You can find us on securityboulevard.com, the Security Boulevard YouTube channel, TechStrong TV, and all of your favorite podcast platforms. Before we begin, let's meet today's panel, starting with Fernando. Fernando, it's good to see you again.
It's good to see you, sir. Happy New Year. I'm Fernando Montenegro. I lead cybersecurity research over here at Twitter.
Awesome. And also joining me on this happiest of New Year's is Mitch Ashley. Mitch, it's good to see you as well.
Best way to start off 2026 with a podcast. Got to go for that. So, Mitch Ashley, I lead the software lifecycle engineering practice at the Futurum Group.
Awesome. And of course, I'm Tom Hollingsworth, event lead for all things related to security at Tech Field Day. Let's jump into today's episode, because one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is we've seen a rise over the last few months in more targeted offensive style security. Like we when we think of security, we still have maybe that old school mentality of a castle walls with a moat and some alligators, and we're going to keep the bad people out. But we've also seen, in a way, kind of an expansion of that, whether it's the red teaming of our own assets to make sure that we're being hacked by friendly people, or in some cases, researchers who said, you know what, I'm just going to take the war to the bad people out there, or who I perceive to be the bad people. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking with the guests today about that, because I think it's a fascinating way to look at it. When we play on the defensive a lot, it feels good, right? Because we defeat these attacks, we make sure that people aren't able to get inside of our organization and steal data, cause chaos, whatever. But let's take it from the red team perspective now. Why is it important in your mind to have a group of people inside your organization that's dedicated to, trying to pick the locks and guess the passwords and expose the areas that are maybe appealing to folks who would want to do you harm?
Where do we begin? I would argue that this is one of the things that personally attracts me so much to cybersecurity as a topic, which is this notion that I can't think of another technology topic where there is adversarial intent, right? It's not as if one database is going to attack you, or if an external is going to log in and reconfigure your database because they don't agree with the settings that you've done for your sharding or something, right? Cybersecurity is that area where, you know how analysts hate the word unique. I can't think of another area in technology where there is adversarial intent. That there is an intelligent adversary on the other side of this, trying to do bad things or trying to do things that you don't want done to your environment, right? And this is fascinating because it then introduces a dynamic that it's about you getting ready for what you think that badness looks like, and then testing it to make sure, right? The thing I mentioned that many years and many pounds and better knees ago, I used to do martial arts, right? And in martial arts, one of the things is that we learn not just to hit, we learn to defend. But you know what? At some point you get tested. Someone is going to kick your face. And if you're not there, you're going to get kicked. Same thing happens here. Right. So there's a few more things, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation as usual. And I'll bring economics in a little bit. But
what's the phrase? Is every plan's great until you get kicked in the face or punched
Mike
in the
Tyson,
face?
everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
That's what it is. Yeah. Just kind of thinking about this, both from having been a practitioner and run red teams before, and also from an analyst perspective. I think one of the best things about doing red teams, and now we can use this with AI in addition to help us do this, but it puts ourselves in the headspace of an attacker and trying to think of novel ways, or validating our procedures as our technology is our automations, all the things that we think we have in place that are going to be great when a hurricane comes. Well, let's pretend we have a hurricane. so that we can see when it really does happen, or we think the unexpected happens. Let's try to think of those unexpected novelty kinds of attacks and situations that we might run into. So it's extremely valuable because it's not just saying, okay, we built the walls and the moats and all the things we think are going to protect us. Let's just wait and see what happens. It's kind of like you got to read the play while it's happening during the game. So let's practice some of those situations so that when it comes up, we're ready for it, or at least we think we're ready for it. And usually that'll help us in our response. So I think it's extremely valuable to do. And I think more mature security teams do that, red teams, not just with themselves, but also with software teams, platform engineers, et cetera. So that's really is a cross-functional activity.
And let's just add one more nuance here that I think that you're absolutely spot on. And we can say that there is a continuum of offensives. There's a continuum of testing, right? Yeah, Tom brings up the red team. So red teaming is, okay, you have people in your organization whose mandate is break in, right? Or under whatever rules of engagement they have, right? One of the things we've observed in the market in the past little while is the rise in breach and attack simulation, and the rise, some people refer to it as integrated security testing as well, right? It bleeds into control validation, right? Do I have the right controls deployed the right way, right? I mean, they're a vendor like a Discern Security or Safe or others, right? And the notion here being that, okay, you said you did it right. How well did you do it, right? And I think that red teaming is a phenomenal aspect, but it's just one of those. Sorry, bad cough.
So I like this idea of the red team in theory. Where I tend to fall down with it is it's either too restricted or it's too chaotic. And Fernando, you bring up this really good point about rules of engagement, right? Like sometimes you kind of have to set these baselines. And if you've ever listened to Jack Rhysider's Darknet Diaries, like every once in a while he'll have like tales from penetration testers and some of the stuff that they kind of get up to. But like, for me, an easy ground rule is you can't use your employee credentials to do things like access the data center, right? Like, why would I be able to get that? Unless I was able to obtain it from like lifting somebody's key card in a bar or something like that. But I also think that if you set the rules of engagement too narrow, then you're basically what you're doing, because I've seen this in print and a lot of other places. It's like, well, you're only allowed to test our security at the gate, and you're only allowed to go through this gate, and you're only allowed to go through the gate between these 2 hours when I have my best security people working. It's like, yeah, but what if I want to come in at 3 a.m. when the guy's half asleep? Like that's kind of one of those things where you're like, wait a minute, this is not how a real person would think. But on the flip side, you cannot let it be too chaotic, because it's like, oh yeah, well, I just, broke out a window in the data center and snuck in, and therefore your physical security sucks. It's like, yeah, but the data center is on the 6th floor. Like somebody would have seen you, or like you have to kind of play by a certain set of rules, because what you're really trying to do is you're trying to improve things. Like I think of the scene in The Matrix where Morpheus is beating up Neo. But it's not because he's trying to win the fight. It's because he's trying to make him a better fighter. It's like, do you really think that's air you're breathing? Like, to me, that's the punchline of a red team. It's like, did you not think that I would bring a set of lockpicks with me?
Well, red teams don't have to be just a wild game of chaotic game of capture the flag. I think you're right. There is a set of scenarios that you want to run, and a set of things that you want to test. Now, you may end up testing things you didn't plan to in some of those scenarios, but I think that's also a place where you can use AI to feed in your scenarios we're testing in our red team. What are we not thinking of? So try to think of those things that that are areas that would be important to test. But you may be interested in response time of incident response. You may be are we collecting the right data? So when we have to diagnose and investigate what is happening, we can actually do that. And where are there gaps in our visibility into it? Is it things that might be in our observability system? Is it things that might be in our governance or other aspects of how you operate. So it's as much a test as the operations, the policies, as it is the people and the process and the technology.
So I think that we are diverging here. I think that there's a nuance here. What we've been describing so far, I agree, uh, is basically a penetration test, right? It's bound, or it has boundaries, right? Uh, and red teaming, at least from my perspective, is a little more free flowing, right? It's look inside our organization. Let's say that I have a security team of 20 people, right? And I say, okay, the three of you are my red team, right? If you remember World War Z or Z, I'm in Canada, right? Remember they have the the odd man out in the group, right? They talk about who's thinking about stuff that we're not thinking about, right? That's the mentality I think about for a red team. It's like, okay, the 17 of us, we're building defenses and we're doing all these things. The three of you, you tell us where we're wrong. You tell us where we're breaking, what we're missing. And in that mentality, I would rather have those three people with as much freedom as possible. It's different than a penetration test, which might be a checkbox element, or maybe not just a checkbox, might be a critical step in a project in an implementation process where, okay, this thing needs to be validated before the project gets shipped. Right? I see red teaming as being a little bit more free flowing. So Tom, I would politely disagree that you can't use internal credentials. It's look, assuming that somebody has internal credentials, what can they do? Right. And then you go from there. So the boundary between where does a penetration test, a vulnerability assessment, a penetration test, and the red team, it's a continuum, I would say.
I can see your point. I think that, a lot of people tend to use that terminology in interchangeably, and they shouldn't. They think that a vulnerability assessment is a red team performing a penetration test, but in fact, there's subtle nuance, right? You're attempting, here I'm testing a specific thing, whereas, maybe in general, the offensive side's idea is to constantly be on alert to, check things. Like the Netflix chaos monkey, right? I'm always looking to break things to see how well you've built them to make them survivable. But when you get to that point, in the case that it's somebody that's employed by a company, it almost kind of falls over into the other part of offensive security, which is if I know that I'm being hacked by somebody, or if I know there's a group that's targeting people like me, why don't I go after them? And that's kind of one of the things we've seen towards the end of 2025 was, some talks that are being given by people at overseas conferences where it's like, yeah, I basically went out and collected a whole bunch of information on unsavory individuals, and I'm going to give it to the FBI, and then I'm going to delete everything that I did so that nobody can get ensnared by it. But we've seen that before, right? Like, was it Marcus Hutchins was one of the greatest offensive people of all time because he effectively black-holed an exploit before it could break wide by registering a domain name that was a kill switch. Of course, when he did that, that led to a whole bunch of other problems, which is usually what happens to these offensive security researchers is they have to toe a very fine line between I'm doing this for the right reasons and now I have become an enemy to the people that I am attacking. And if that's a state-sponsored organization, well, now you're on somebody's list. Like, where is that line for people? When does the red team for my company become, well, now I'm just going to go attack people that are the bad guys?
Well, I think you have to be very cautious about going and attacking the bad guys, right? I mean, nation states can do that. They have the infrastructure, they have the wherewithal to do it. You as a corporation or enterprise or whatever entity you are, you really want to go sort of poking the bear. And now, because they're going to respond, right? If you really are going to do something serious, you're like to get a response. So I'd be very thoughtful about how I would go.
But Mitch, it gets you the headlines. That's the thing, right? Is I want to be hacker famous. I want to be the one who brought down the, fancy gummy bear team this time that was like, stealing Bitcoin from people. Like that's how can you avoid the lure of that?
Meanwhile, while you're fixing your credit report and everything else that they compromised because you got their attention, it isn't worth it.
True.
Yeah, this is where let's bring in economics. This is where the Dunning-Kruger effect comes to mind, right? It's the thing that in the context that I think that I wholeheartedly agree with Mitch that you need to be exceedingly thoughtful about this, and you need to because the expectation that you are going to bring down a massive state-sponsored campaign um, seems ambitious, right? And I think that there is a uh, yes, I think that uh, going after malicious actors yourself does have benefits in terms of yes, you're attacking someone who is doing harm to you or your community. You are learning potentially new techniques, but be very careful about what you're doing because you are stepping into a world that you may not be ready for. To bring my favorite movie quote from Untouchables, 1987, you are bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? We want to be exceedingly careful with that. I would. This is the kind of thing where we talk with more junior practitioners. Hey, should I be doing this? This is one of the areas where I'm like, you really, really want to think this through many times over, and then probably the answer should be no. But that's
might be bringing a knife to an RPG fight. So be careful.
Well, not only that, but if you're doing it on behalf of a company, you've opened that company up to liability. That's why you typically see these groups. If they're anybody, it's usually single people or like their own little collective, if you will, simply because like they may not be able to shut you down and ruin your credit, to Mitch's point, but they can have their government file a lawsuit on your behalf against the company that you're working for. Like, and that's one of those weird things of like, where does the problem actually lie? Because we've all looked at the firewall logs. Like, why is this guy in some Eastern European country trying to SSH into my server? I know, I'll do this to him. It's like, no, you can't do that. Or you have to think about the rules of engagement for that because it can escalate very quickly. And I think that most people, they love the idea of punishing someone. They do not like the idea of getting punished. And that's usually what happens is you will turn around. Like, take that energy and use it to defend yourself better. Like take what you're doing and turn it on your own firewall and go, okay, I'm going to find all of the little problems in here, and you'll be better off for it. But yeah, once you've poked the bear or the fancy whatever it is this week, like you are in for a world of hurt. I mean, to reference that point, that the hacker Martha Root, the reason why they appeared on stage at this conference in a pink Power Ranger outfit was because they really didn't want people knowing who they were, because it doesn't take much for you to figure that out and start causing all kinds of havoc.
One of the things I wanted to bring up is red teams can also, I'm sure you're thinking about this, Fernando. Red teams can also look ahead and say, hey, I know we're using AI, right, in these productivity tools with 365, but maybe we're doing some experimentation with LLMs. Maybe we're building some early agents. Maybe we're really going gung-ho on doing some of those things. And you can use your red team of like, well, let's just take a break from the day-to-day. Let's talk about new things that we're doing and what that attack surface looks like and how would we attack it based on what we know. And maybe that'll surface some shortcomings, some big things we need to address now. So maybe you need to go to the agent control plane and see if that's something you can thwart the guardrails. Maybe the kill switch, you need a kill switch for certain kinds of agents. Of course, and then there's prompt injection and prompt poisoning and all kinds of good things to go examine. That also educates you, but it gets you thinking ahead of before somebody in leadership says, hey, now we need a policy for X, Y, and Z with AI. Well, we've already been working on that. We're ahead of the game there. At least we're partially ahead of the game. What are you thinking about in that space, Fernando?
Yeah, well, I think it's Tuesday. right? I'm thinking it's Tuesday. Like, okay, we're not recording on a Tuesday, but I think it's a Tuesday, right? In the context of, yes, it's now part of the organization's attack surface, where I would be, um, and I think you're right that red teams need the they need the skills and the knowledge to know their environment and attack their environment with against current expected threats, but also against, hey, what else is going on out there? To your point, AI, right? And the thing that um, I would be cautious of is, to go back to Tom's point, rules of engagement, right? If the red team, if the red team is attacking an AI environment, right, and is highlighting all kinds of flaws about that AI environment, right, but that AI environment is not in production yet, right, that's kind of like uh, being not a very good team player. I'm not sure how much we can use expletives in this podcast, right? But it's one thing for organizations to have an understanding of the threat environment for what they're building. It's another thing once they put it into production, right? Which brings up one of the things that I think people should pay particular attention to, which is threat modeling, right? So when you think about rules of engagement, I think that one of the key contributors to that set of rules is, what is our threat model? What it is that we are concerned about from one perspective, and that threat model might be guiding what we're doing. That threat model might be incomplete, and this is where the knowledge from the red team and others about, hey, look, your threat model worries about A, B, C. It doesn't worry about D through Z, right? That's a very important contribution that I think red teams can have an insight on. But at the same time, they should only do the red teaming stuff in a system that is expecting that, right? I think that to go back to martial arts, like if I'm just practicing a simple block, right, and someone complains that, look, you're not protecting your shins, whatever. Look, no, I'm practicing my blocks, right? We'll deal with that later. So yes, I agree with you 100%. With the caveat that people should be nice to each other.
Yes, there has to be kind of that assumed, like, I'm not doing this to be malicious thing. But at the same time, going back to something that I learned late last year from our friends over at Microsoft, this idea of using graphs to do this, like, graphs are the way that people think, right? So when I land on a system and I examine all of the ways that I can move off of it, like, what if my extranet provider has an unsecured link? Like, is it my responsibility to report that with the hope that they're going to fix it? Or should I probe it to see how far I can get? Because a lot of times that's what happens, right? It's like, oh, well, I found out it's basically a telnet connection or something stupid like that, and I can get a whole lot of access to your systems that I shouldn't. Well, why were you doing that? You should have not told us. And we see that a lot with, like, vulnerability reporting and bug bounties, right? It's like, why I reported this 6 months ago, why haven't you patched it? Oh, well, it's not a low priority for us. But as soon as you make it go live on the internet, suddenly, oh, well, you're in trouble because you disclosed this and you shouldn't have. Like, you've got to play within the rules, but sometimes you have to break or bend some of those rules to affect change.
I think you don't want to blur the lines between hiring someone to do penetration testing versus doing your red teams. In other words, you're not the internal version of an outside group trying to penetrate somebody else's stuff. To your point, Fernando, about doing things above board, right? You may want to do some testing against an application that's getting ready to go into production, but that probably ought to be at the request of or in cooperation with the folks that are getting it ready, right? That's part of your security readiness process. But the advantage of an external team is they don't know what you know. it's an advantage of all the stuff you know about your systems and infrastructure, everything else. But that's also a liability, because you're stuck in a framework of how you think about those systems and how they're secured, versus someone who doesn't know that. They're going to find the things that you're not thinking about. So I think we need to separate the why you use an external pen testing group versus what a red team is doing. It's not to supplant that external function.
It's interesting that I see it as if I agree, liability and the benefit. I see the benefit more than the liability, in the context that, okay, I know that this particular system was connected to that old project, but you know what? That project stakeholder, they left the company, right? I wonder what's going on with that. I wonder who's managing that project now. And then off you go, and you find an area that is not being observed, and things blow up from there. And you were able to successfully do that. The thing that I worry a lot is when you cross that boundary between, I am testing something that belongs to my organization, I'm testing something that belongs to somebody else, right? And this blows up in many ways. I'm thinking here about those two pen testers from that were arrested and were trying to physically break into a courthouse under the auspices of like, they had rules of engagement, except that the organization that contracted them apparently didn't have the rights to do that. Like, it's like me pen testing a building when I'm just a renter at the building, right? So I think that was the crux of the problem. So you run into those things with professional pen testing as well. So I think that the guideline for offensive security for an organization should be, mind your own stuff, don't go too far out. I'm also reminded of, and again, these things come all the time, but there was an incident where someone found an issue on a public website where they could enumerate thousands of IDs. And they did, right? Well, you should have probably stopped at 2 or 3 IDs, just to prove the point that you can enumerate and not do all of them, right? So, do you remember which one I'm talking about? I forget which city it was. But these are all these kinds of problems where, now, take this one step further. Oh, I'm going to go after against bad state-sponsored group that does that. They are not going to complain about you to your employer. They are not going, no. They are going to try something more nefarious. Again, exceedingly careful, people. And just in all, like, unless there's an exceedingly good reason, stick within your organization, kind of thing.
I think that's probably the thing we should take away from this, right? Is there have to be rules of engagement. And if there are no rules of engagement, you have to start asking yourself what kind of battle you're fighting. Because I don't think you're fighting the battle you want to fight. You're picking on somebody that will not hold back from attacking you. And so if you have clear rules of engagement, you understand the objectives and you understand the purpose behind it, I think you're probably going to be a little bit better off on the offensive security side. But let's be honest, the people who are really going offensive are probably not listening to podcasts like this. They're probably getting ready to write their own. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I just want to say one thing. Like, I don't want people to miss. There are times when this is necessary, right? And here I'm thinking about all the offensive security that goes on in the defense of Ukraine, for example, right? All that they've done with drones over there, right? That's a different scenario. Like, we're talking war fighting here, right? That's different than, oh, I'm going to go after these kind of criminals and see what I can get about them. Right? Let's keep those things in perspective.
Yeah, perspective is what's important. Speaking of perspective, Mitch, what are some things you got working now here at the beginning of 2026 that people should be checking out?
Well, we're kicking off a whole series of things here. Fernando and I have been working on predictions for our respective areas, and planning for our relative practices. So there's a bunch of writing that I'm doing. We have videos that are coming out. We have Predict 2026 that's happening, I think, on the 17th of January, if I remember right, somewhere along the line, in a few days, not too far down the road. So we're recording some of those things. So it's a lot about looking ahead for the rest of the year and taking the lessons of last year of maybe I need to be a little more aggressive in some of my predictions, and things are moving pretty dang fast, at least in the area of AI, but also where there are areas of collaboration of not just in the practitioner world, but also us looking at it from an analyst perspective. So doing podcasts and things like this, maybe collaboration on some reports. I'm working on some ideas for 2 different new signal reports. So there's a lot of planning, setting the stage for this year. And I think we're going to get even a lot more done than we did last year. It was a great year, 2025 for us.
Awesome. Fernando, what have you got?
I concur. One of the things that I have is that I'm not sure when people are listening to this, but we are just putting the final touches on the cybersecurity decision maker surveys that we conducted in the fourth quarter 25. That data for term subscribers, that data is now live on the platform. I don't think it's been. I don't know if the press release went out yet, but so we have both market sizing and user sentiment data out now, which is really cool. I love this about my job. Right. And as Mitch said, I mean, Predict 2026 is coming up. We have where things are going, and there is a lot going on, right? And the stakes on cybersecurity keep rising, right? This is foundational to modern society, right? And that's why we're seeing impacts in many places.
Correction, it's January 15th is the date, 9 a.m. Eastern.
Well, we've also got a lot of stuff going on over at Tech Field Day. If you want to check out some of that cool stuff, including we're going to be at RSA for the first time, RSA 2026. We already have a page up. We have some great presenters that are getting ready to be there, and we'll be adding more information about some more great presenters in the list and the delegates who will be joining us there. techfieldday.com is the place to check that out. We want to thank you for listening to this episode of the Security Boulevard Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you know what to do. Head over to YouTube or your favorite podcast application of choice. Hit the subscribe button. We don't want you to miss any of the episodes. We also appreciate it if you leave a rating, a review, and a comment. That helps the show grow and reach new audiences. This podcast is brought to you by securityboulevard.com and the Featureroom Group. For show notes and information on past and future episodes, check out securityboulevard.com, TechStrong TV website, or the TechStrong TV app, which is available on pretty much every smart device, whether it's a TV, phone, tablet, you name it, it's there. Follow Security Boulevard on X, Twitter, and LinkedIn at SecurityBLVD. That has all the content you could ever hope for. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.